In the town of Timbuktu, all the clocks ticked perfectly. They were either old-fashioned grandfather clocks or modern digital clocks, but they all worked perfectly and in unison. That is, except for the one clock that wasn't like the others, the one that had the glow in the dark hands that ticked slower than the rest, so slow that it was almost imperceptible, and its chime sounded more like a gong than a ding. The clock was on the side of a building owned by the mayor. He'd gotten it from a traveling salesman years ago, and he'd never had it fixed. He just ended up covering it with an awning to keep the rain and snow off its face. From his perspective, it was nothing more than an expensive paperweight. But from the perspective of the traveling salesman, it was much more than that. You see, he made sure every clock he sold was slightly different. It was his way of making sure his clock stood out, and this one with the luminescent hands was his masterpiece. He knew the townspeople would come to rely on its glow in the dark hands at night, especially during the long, dark winter nights. And he was right. It became the unofficial night clock. The children would gather around it in the evenings to tell each other spooky stories while its hands glowed a faint green in the darkness. The adults would check it to make sure they weren't late for work the next day. Its chime echoed through the square, marking the passing of time. And the traveling salesman would often think to himself, "I told you so." That is until one fateful day when the clock stopped ticking altogether. Its hands froze at 10 minutes to midnight. The townspeople didn't notice at first. After all, who's counting? But then they did start to notice. People would come into the square, look up at the clock and realize they had no idea what time it was. Some would consult their wristwatches, but many didn't wear them. And even those that did couldn't agree on the time. One said it was 9 o'clock, another said it was 10:30. "I don't care what your fancy watch says," the first man said. "We should be going by the town clock. After all, it's the biggest clock in town." "Yeah, but it's not working," the second man replied. And that's when the mayor decided something had to be done. He called a town meeting. "We need to get to the bottom of this," he said. "Our entire economy depends on the precision of our clocks. If we can't agree on the time, we can't agree on anything." All the townspeople nodded in solemn agreement. They couldn't remember a time when the clocks hadn't been in sync. But there was one person who didn't attend the meeting, the traveling salesman. He was sick and in bed, and the last thing he wanted to do was listen to a bunch of people complain about his clocks. "I swear," he said to himself, "if any one of them mentions my clocks, I'm going to get up and leave." And they did mention his clocks, but he didn't hear it because right before that the room went dark. A blackout. The townspeople panicked. What if it lasted all night? How would they ever get up in the morning? Then someone pointed to the clock on the side of the building. Its hands were glowing faintly in the darkness. "Look," someone said, "we can use that clock to tell the time." "But how accurate is it?" someone else asked. "It's never been right before." "Well," the first person replied, "it can't be that wrong. Look, there's a little green glow around the numbers. That means it's still working. And besides, what choice do we have?" So the townspeople took the clock's glow at face value, or rather minute value, and decided to go with it. They planned out their day based on the clock's chime and the position of its hands. They even hung lanterns around the clock so they could read the numbers more easily. The blackout lasted 3 days, but thanks to the clock, the townspeople got through it without killing each other. When the power came back on, they looked at their wristwatches and realized they'd been off the entire time. "That clock saved us," someone said. "We should put it somewhere more prominent." And that's exactly what they did. They moved the clock to the center of town and made it the official town clock. Everyone agreed it was the best clock for the job, even the traveling salesman. He got up out of bed, feeling better now that he wasn't needed. He walked over to the clock and smiled. It was a beautiful sight, even if it meant that he'd never get to tell anyone. "I told you so." This story is based on the traditional tale of the emperor's new clothes. Do you know what that story is? Let me tell you. Once upon a time, there was an emperor who liked to wear very fancy clothes. One day, he met a tailor who convinced him to buy a suit made of a magical fabric that was invisible to anyone who was stupid. The emperor thought he looked great in the suit, but in reality, he'd just spent a lot of money on nothing. That's why when a child said, "Hey, the emperor has no clothes," the emperor was furious. He had that child put in prison along with anyone else who said they couldn't see his suit. One day, though, the emperor decided to visit the tailor in his shop to see if he could add some more invisible garments to his wardrobe. As he approached the shop, he heard a commotion inside and decided to investigate. Peeking through the window, he saw the tailor with a sack full of gold coins. "You tricked me!" the emperor shouted. "I finally realize I've been taken for a ride." The tailor turned around and saw the emperor. "Oh no," he said, "run for your life." The emperor turned and ran as fast as he could. He ran past the child's prison and set everyone free. And that's when the people realized that the emperor wasn't wearing any clothes. They laughed and laughed and laughed. From that day on, the emperor was a changed man. He wore simple clothes and spent his days visiting people who were in prison for simply telling the truth. As for the tailor, he was put in prison for trying to scam the emperor. But he only served 5 years instead of 10, because it turns out he had connections.